All right, I think we're live. Go for it.
We are. All right. Happy Monday. Happy Martin Luther King Day, in fact, on this beautiful day, Monday, January 16th at 3 p.m. my time. I am actually on the East Coast, though normally tuning in from the West Coast. And this is our Lyceum of the day, of the month specifically, for the Accounting Alchemy Network. So for those of you who aren't familiar or don't recall, a reminder that the Accounting Alchemy Network is really a community of accounting professionals who've come together to see how we can support each other in our work towards transforming the profession to be more regenerative. In essence, what does that really mean? It means that we're talking about things like what role does an accountant have in climate action, or addressing DEI issues within a firm. And we do a lot of different types of programming. We've got our Lyceums, we've got our social forums, we've got an amazing backlog of really incredible webinars from people who've shared their insights on these topics. And today will be one of those moments where we actually get to spotlight somebody in our community who's actually practicing the work that we advocate for at the Accounting Alchemy Network. So I'm going to pass the ball over to Ingrid, who's going to introduce our guest, and then we'll dive in and learn a little bit more about how Robina is serving as a regenerative professional in the industry. Over to you, Ingrid.
Yes, thank you so much, Matthew. And I'm super, super stoked for today. For anyone who hasn't met me before, I'm Ingrid Edstrom, co-founder of the Accounting Alchemy Network. And I first met Robina years and years ago through a women's business network that we're both part of, the Elevate Alliance. And we got to dive straight into, oh, hey, do you want to be on my show? And I got to host you as a guest on my video podcast that people can find on YouTube and interview you with the puppets, which was super, super fun. And you even brought your own puppet, and just learning about your beautiful, heart-focused way of going about business. And I remember the way that you described that moment where your soul just will no longer be denied, and how that shaped me. And I'm so looking forward to this conversation and hearing where you've gone since then, because it's been a few years since then. Of course, you know, we talk outside of this, but we haven't gotten to talk in this like deeper function. So this is a Lyceum conversation. This is an organic conversation, not scripted. Matthew and I are coming up with questions for Robina as we go. And just really looking forward to hearing about the amazing work that you are doing in the accounting profession and in the world at this point, Robina, so that we can shine a spotlight on your business and the change that you are creating in the world. So with that, welcome everyone, Robina Bennion. Robina, I would love it if you would take a moment to just give us the high level introduction of you and what you're working on.
Oh gosh. Well, thank you for that. I mean, I feel like how do I top that? I always listen to people say something about me and I'm always blown away, and I'm like, I don't know what to say in addition to that, but thank you, Ingrid and Matthew. For me, my passion right now, where it lies, is like it's so multifaceted. In some aspects, it's helping primarily women who own businesses, especially in accounting, determine, does what you are creating align with your soul, right? Does your success align with your soul? And primarily we start with money to determine if that is or not. And then how can we create change within your business that does align you with your soul? And what does that look like? And then using my accounting knowledge, obviously the money coaching pieces of it, and bringing it all together. So that is one of my primary passions. And then just continual, I don't want to say education, but I think continual conversation about money, making it a part of everyday conversation about our dreams and our goals. How is that showing up in our life? What does that look like? How can we combine our creative side to expand our business and see what more can be found in that realm? And just showing up as myself, having an authentic conversation like this. And I believe that invites other people to do the same.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much, Robina. So I guess the first question that I have, if you would provide a little bit of your history. I know that you've got a pretty great story talking about how you transitioned from working as a CPA to what you're doing now. And I would love it if you would give our audience a little bit of what your path has looked like up to this point.
Okay, well, let's do the Reader's Digest version because that could be quite long. I retired from public accounting within the last few years, which means I've got about 25-ish years under my belt with a license. And you add to that, I actually started way back in high school when I was around 15, working in accounting firms. And I just grew up through the ranks. I didn't want to start in a big firm, started small and just expanded as I moved around and got more comfortable. And for me personally, I think even the catalyst of where I am now was there was a point in my career where something shifted. Instead of making it a part of my life, it became my life. I became very absorbed in all of that, because it was so demanding. And I made these choices to participate in it, right? Like it was totally of my doing. And it reached a point where something just was not feeling right anymore. My health was suffering. I actually had to take medical leave from, what I was doing, which happened in February. Not a great time if you're a senior tax manager to tell your firm, like, hey, I need to step out for a while. And the realization came, I need to do something different with my life. And if I don't, taking medical leave is going to be like a preferable option at that point, we'll say. So I really struggled with transitioning out of public accounting, but I just knew I was meant for something more, to help people in a different way with all of my years of experience and knowledge. And that required me to get really uncomfortable and start my own business. And then another business, I went into I did what I knew when I stepped away, but then it was, I'm going to keep this, small intentionally because I know that there's something next. And I followed that something next. When people asked me to coach them, I said, well, I'm happy to do that, but I don't want to just create a budget for you. That's not helping. How can I help you at a deeper level to create long-term change? And that's how I became a certified money coach. And it just kept evolving from there. I kept putting myself in places that felt uncomfortable, but I just kept showing up, asking questions and doing the deeper work. And that's where I am today. And in fact, over the last year, one of the more beautiful experiences, so unexpectedly, is I became an end-of-life doula. And that really, in itself, I thought, oh gosh, this is going to bring up stuff and it's going to be super uncomfortable and I'm going to be afraid of discussing this topic. And it was really quite the opposite.
Cool. Yeah, Robina, actually, I'm glad that you brought up the doula certification, because that's something that really stood out for me in terms of looking at your credentials and your work in the world. And so I wanted to sort of ask the question, but put some context to it too. In that one of the books that we read last year was Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics. And he talks about the age of transition, right? Where we're kind of going from this old way of being and operating to this new way of being and operating. And then another friend of mine recommended a book called Hospicing Modernity, which in essence is talking about sort of helping these old institutions to pass away effectively and with compassion. And so my curiosity for you is, as you look at, and this might be kind of going for some of the big questions right out of the gate, but it's like, how do you apply this body of work that you have around doulaship and end-of-life stuff to the work that we're doing in the accounting profession in this sort of period that we're in, where we are having to really re-examine some of the things that, quote, have always been done that way. I'm curious what your reflections are on that.
Oh, yeah, you're going for a big one right there. So it's beautiful the way that it aligns. I actually was just doing a presentation with Elevate Alliance, and the topic was It All Begins with Love. And in that process, I started diving deeper into what that really meant for me personally. Like I can only speak about me. I don't want to make presumptions about everybody else. And there was a point in my journey, even in the last year, like I've been doing this for a while, and is this being just kind of finding out who I really am and how I want to show up in the world. But I stopped to ask, do I really love myself? Do I really have that same relationship with myself that I say that I do with other people? And they say that you can't be something if you're not, you're not being that with yourself, right? Like if I want somebody to trust me and all of that, it's a personal relationship too. And the answer was no, I wasn't. So then this last year, it's been kind of how can I love myself? What does it look like to have a relationship with myself? And I feel like that ties into your question, Matthew, and the whole end of life doula aspect is developing a relationship with grief, understanding what that is, allows at least me to love myself more fully. And really, like, even that regenerative conversation that we talk about is to return back to who I really am, even in the old world to the new world. Well, if we think about it in, relation to ourselves, are we going from the old me? Am I going from the old me, CPA Robina, to the new Robina, or am I just going back to a like different iteration, right? And so allowing those components of me to die versus cling onto and pull around this pain throughout my life, right? So, for example, the Awakener program. One of the great things in there is someone says, when we throw it away, what is it away? And I was like, oh, okay. So there's there's an iteration of me that believes that there's an away, but I don't anymore, right? So now I can walk through a little bit of a process, and it's okay to mourn and grieve that ignorance is bliss me before that moment no longer views the world in that way, right? And so I feel like if we open up the door to grief and love and honoring, then it's allowing people to show up in the workplace more authentically. And that's how we start to create change within the accounting profession, and then get more comfortable in saying, is this really like the way that we want to do it going forward? I understand that that's the way it was in the past, but the me of the past believed that to be a sustainable way. And I know from my own personal experience that for me as a human, it's not.
Got it. Now, Ingrid, I saw one of your other questions in the back channel, so I'm going to kind of weave that in here. And thank you, Robina, for that. And one of the things that I had the opportunity to do prior to this call was take your money quiz about the different person. And I think I was in a mood when I took that, to be clear, but which I'm sure comes up. But I bring that up only because when I looked at that list, I was like, oh, there's some things about the boxes that I checked and the categories that I got that I was like, ooh, I don't necessarily want that to be in my way of being. And I say that because I want to sort of rewind and ask you a question, right? So what does it mean to be a certified money coach? How do these archetypes play a role in them? And then how do you help people to sort of navigate out of these ways of being that aren't actually regenerative of their financial well-being? So it's sort of a three-part question. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, and you may have to remind me of all the parts as I go through. And I know that like we're kind of shifting gears, so it takes me a moment to go back over into that hat. But the money quiz, just like you were talking about, like I was in a mood. Well, it's like those are very reflective of where we are in that time, right? These archetypes, these beliefs, if you will, that we're having in this moment, they drive our actions. And so our mood can impact the way that we feel about money in that moment, right? So as a business owner, there are days when I am like, I am on fire. This is a game changer. And so if I take that quiz, like I'm going to like rank, that's not the right word, but my results are going to look different because the parts that are active in me in that moment, they're front and center stage, right? They're driving the car, if you will, they're speaking the loudest. And then on other days, when I'm like, woe is me, I didn't make a great decision, my business is that, why did I do this? And to get in that mindset or that mood, then my results are going to reflect that. And it's a great way to step into conversation with people and say, listen, these can change at any given time. And we've had a lot of things happening lately, whether it be a pandemic, a recession, inflation, just listening to the news can impact the way that we feel about our money. And and also knowing like, this isn't who you are, it's a snapshot of your energy in a moment, and that can change. From there, then the conversation turns into, well, what are you believing to be true? How are you, what words are you using throughout your daily life? Because those can be beliefs that you inherit, right? Like a habit that you don't even know that you picked up from. It could be as simple as like, there's a phrase that a parent uses, and then it becomes your own phrase. and you don't even know when you picked it up. But then you're like, what you're saying over and over can become a belief. So in that, starting to identify, if possible, the origins of where certain actions and thoughts show up, and what tools then can we implement to try to shift that behavior, right? Like, how do we rewind it? So an example would be, and I share a lot, is I remember at a young age standing in my room and saying, like, I am going to be successful and when I get older so that I can afford the same shoe in every color. And for me, that was a driver. It kept me motivated. I went to school and I did all of these things that, because I didn't know that I may not necessarily be able to do, nobody told me. So I just kept driving and driving. And it was like this badge of honor, right? Like I could have the same shoe in every color. But I also didn't see that that was something that was limiting me, because then when I go shop, for example, then I want the red and the blue pin and the green pin and all of these things that I don't necessarily need. And so now that I could identify that habit, right, that I created within myself unconsciously, even an unconscious agreement that I made with myself, I can implement new ways. And now that I have that awareness, I can implement new ways to shop. And maybe I walk around with the pins in my hand and then I go put them back, right? Like, so that's just kind of the process, that one way that you potentially walk through this with clients. Did I capture everything?
Yes. What is the money coaching? What is
Yeah.
this test? And then how do you help your clients sort of to shift out of some of these ways of being? Those are the, so I feel satiated in your response. Yes, thank you.
And the money coaching, it's behavioral money coaching. Like, how do you alter your habitat, or your habitat, right? Your habits are your habitat.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Robina. I want to just thank you for voicing part of your experience in the Awakener program. And for anyone watching this Lyceum right now who hasn't checked out the Awakener program yet, you can find, I'm sure, a myriad of posts about the Awakener program and how you can sign up and participate in that within the Accounting Alchemy Network. And it is really, really great education and kind of a foundational piece of how we are shepherding forth some of these discussions in the Accounting Alchemy Network, which kind of leads me to my next question, because a big part of what we're working to discuss here in the AAN is how we can apply the big changes that we want to see in the world that reflect our personal values of how we can be the change we want to see in the world, and how that shows up in our practices. And one of the reasons why we invited you, Robina, to be our guest here and spotlight on what you're doing is to showcase this is someone who is walking her talk. I really look up to you and the great work that you're doing in the world in that way. And so I would love to ask you kind of a bit of a two-part question. One, first, if you could wave a magic wand and fix any one thing in our world, what would you change or fix? And then how do you fit that into the work that you do? How do you apply that to the work that you're doing in the world? And then kind of second chunk question. So that's like all like one big question. So here we've got another multi-part question. Here we go.
Yeah.
And then for the accounting professionals watching this Lyceum, what pieces of money coaching would it be good for a lot of accounting professionals to learn, recognizing that we're having deep conversations about money with our clients on a daily basis? And how can we be better stewards holding that container for that conversation in a healthy way with our clients? What are some of the fundamentals that it would be good for all financial professionals to be aware of along the money coaching lines so that we can create those values-focused changes in our own practices?
Oof. So those are big ones right there. I mean, just if I could wave a magic wand, right? Like, I used to play that game with my son when he was younger, like, would you rather? It's like, if you had a superpower, what would it be? And, honestly, I think at the root of it all is just love. Like, how do we, I could wave a wand and for people to feel love for themselves, to understand what it feels like to have love and then love for somebody else, so that Like, for example, we talked about dying, right? Somebody passes away. What choices are you making out of fear versus out of love? Like, if you could have love and reverence for that person's life and their path and their journey, how might that like end of life look differently, right? And the same, I guess, could be applied to the accounting profession, right? Like, if we had reverence for another person's life and what they're doing and offering, and we can come at that relationship as an employer, an employee, a partner with love, how might that alter the way that, you know, the accounting profession is? But that second part, can you ask it again? Because I feel like there's a piece in there that I'm not speaking to, and I wanted to when you asked it. Oh, the money
Yeah.
coaching. How does it apply?
Which, can I add something to that little
Yeah.
question? Because we also have a great question from Mariette in the chat. When it comes to the money types and unconscious beliefs, if we can kind of step that back for a moment and describe the types and the unconscious beliefs a little bit more, definition of terms for anyone who maybe hasn't heard those terms before.
Yeah. So taking a step back then with explaining what the money types are. And they vary. They're different coaches use different names. And so you can have innocent, victim. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. Martyr, ruler, warrior, hero, creator, creative artist, maverick, fool. So those are some interchangeable terms. And so they're pretty self-explanatory. You can get an idea. And with that, then but what it is it's kind of happening at an unconscious level, some of these actions that people might take. An example of that might be when I took the quiz initially, I had the warrior archetype within me, but I also had an innocent that was a little bit more active. And what that means is a warrior loves to collect data. As you can imagine, there's a lot of warriors within the accounting financial industry. We're data collectors. We want to be in control of our money and our choices, right? We don't want to place that in somebody else's hands. So if you tell me, oh, just do this, and I don't have anything to back it up, I'm not going to do that. That's just not the way that I am. The other side, though, is having the awareness that I have a little bit of that innocent archetype within me. Is the innocent gets overwhelmed with information. And so if we give them too much, they just put their heads in the sand, they go quiet, they go dark, ghosting you, right? Like, we know those clients that don't return the emails or send us the information. And so it's a balance. And so I've learned, at least for myself, I'm going to go collect data, and then I'm going to pause, figure out what step I want to take next, and then I'll go back and do it. And the same thing can be done with working with our clients. Returning to your question of how can we utilize this money coaching in a way to further the accounting profession. There are a lot of people in accounting that don't have a great relationship with money. And I think that that's a piece we're not talking about either. And I know for myself, everyone would say, I bet you balance your bank statement every month. And I'm like, yeah, no, not really. Like, I run a spreadsheet. I know where I am. I know it's going to be cashed, but I'm not doing the actual balancing of the bank, my bank reconciliation every month when I was practicing, and people would say that. So there's like this, like, hidden underbelly, if you will, of the accounting profession, of people having a not great relationship with money, not managing it. And that piece of it, of talking about the behavioral aspects of money and integrating that into the profession, could be profoundly life-changing to so many people. You're not feeling like you're committed to this firm, that if I just make it to my next paycheck, right? If you're just living paycheck to paycheck, how much freedom do you have in your career, right? How much are you believing that you have? And then how are you having conversations with your client? And are you asking them questions that are actually going to help them and empower them? Because I've been at the table with clients who were multimillionaires and they lost everything. And not once in that conversation with them did we ever ask about how much debt they had at a personal level, how much money they have, how do you feel about money, and what are the things that we should be aware of in a conversation if we know that a tax bill is coming. I feel like it could just change the way that we service our clients and be more holistic in the way that we do it.
Cool. Thank you, Robina. And we have some more comments coming in, so I just want to kind of like follow up on that and kind of go a little bit deeper, and then I'll take us into a slightly different direction in a moment. So Mariette made a comment about sort of the distinction between unconscious versus conscious, sort of one's conscious relationship to these different, these different archetypes. Can you just say, maybe speak to the distinction between unconscious versus conscious, and then how, and then I guess my sort of curiosity around that is, when you're working with a client where you're witnessing perhaps an unconscious archetype coming forward, how do you navigate that conversation in a productive or effective way? Because I would imagine that, somebody like me is like, what do you mean I'm a martyr? What do you mean I'm this? No way, Jose, and yet somehow that might actually be the archetype that's maybe preventing me from achieving my goals. So speak to the unconscious versus the conscious, and then how you work with those distinctions in your conversations.
Yeah, well, and going to the martyr, for example, a lot of people in the accounting profession are also, they have that martyr or caretaker archetype show up, where they're always giving and giving and giving. And then it's like, I do so much for everybody else, but nobody's doing for me, right? Which a warrior, a hero person or heroine, right? We can go to that place because we're constantly giving, right? We're driving there, and then it can get exhausting. And so that is more the energy that shows up in that space. And in the conversations that I have with people, and after doing it for a while, I can get a sense of where somebody's coming from. But to answer the question of conscious versus unconscious, there is a lot out there to be written about being conscious. Like, we're aware. That's basically what it is, right? Like an awareness. And so people say, well, if it's an unconscious, habit, then how do I fix it? And it's just getting curious and asking the questions, asking, like, even, what hat am I wearing today? Who's making this choice, right? Like, what money type might be making this choice? That's beginning to get more conscious about the choices that you're making. And Mariette, it could be like intentional. Am I being intentional in what I'm doing? And what does that mean? Like, who do I want to be in this moment? So there's all different ways that you could frame it to say, okay, well, if conscious and unconscious doesn't make sense, then it's maybe, am I being intentional, right? Like, are you conscious to when you're, of driving to the store, or are you just like on autopilot and not really being conscious about every action that you're taking when you drive from your house to the grocery store, right? Like, because when you are, at least for me, I'm more aware of the people in the cars around me, the trees that are around, right? Birds, weather, and everything that's happening, versus being lost in my own thoughts and not being really conscious of what I'm doing. So with my clients, to answer the other question of, if I think that I see something, right? Or if I'm feeling it, and a lot of times it's just an intuition, I'm listening to people's language. I'm listening to the words that they are using. So if we're talking about, for example, a spouse, and conversations that they're having with that person, I'm listening to the words that that person's using. I'm not working with the spouse, I'm working with them. And so then it's a question. So for example, if somebody says, well, I don't share my bills with my husband. Okay. That's a real life example of someone that I've worked with. And we're talking through that. And it's like, okay, well, like, you don't share your bills with them. Like, why don't you tell me more about that? And so it's opening the door to ask a question. And then like, by asking the question, and then the person says, well, when I, was X number of years old, somebody told me, don't ever rely on another person for my own finances. And so then it's like, okay, well, let's, like, how else does that show up in your life? Are there any other areas where you don't feel comfortable sharing about your finances? So for example, your CPA, right? And so it's just asking the questions versus telling somebody. Because if I tell somebody, you told me this, I think this may be keeping you from, that doesn't land the same as somebody arriving there themselves. That aha moment that people get. Like, I may have a hint of it, but if they don't arrive there themselves, it's not going to have the same transformational effect as if I told them.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah. So I want to kind of take a step back too, because you have your sort of one-on-one services with your clients, and to be clear, where can people take this test, just so they know about the test and where to go to get it?
Yeah, you can just go to my website, robinabennion.com, and there's a tab that says money quiz, and you can go on there. It's totally free to take. I even actually offer complimentary consultations. No commitment, just to share, because I feel like it's that important for people to understand at least a little bit of what may be happening and open the door.
Yeah, exactly. So I got that notice, and I saw that too. I was like, ooh, I get to do a little session with Robina. So thank you. That's awesome, and an amazing offer, right? But I also noticed you've got books, and you've got podcasts, and you've got articles now that you're writing for the Woodard Group. So can you kind of speak more broadly to some of the different things that you're doing in the world, just so that our listeners can get a broader sense of maybe the service offerings that as a practitioner you're putting out in the world?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I do private coaching generally with business owners, and but there are people who are, like they're W-2 employees and they're working for somebody as well. Beyond that, I do soul circles, which is again kind of those same people coming into community. We're exploring, I think, really heartfelt conversations and understanding the power of collaboration and being in a community where you feel like you can just show up as who you are. Like I say, show up as you are and leave as you're meant to be. That's my little motto for the group. And so we explore these conversations that sometimes are uncomfortable. I'm really honest about where I am in something, and it has turned into some beautiful relationships. And through that, I've even been working on, like, what does it look like to have this future accounting firm that we've been talking about? What are those questions we need to be asking? And it started quite a few years ago when I just said, ask myself, how, if I were to create a sustainable business in accounting or for myself, what would that look like? So we get to explore trying those hats on in that space. And then with the book, that was also born of bringing people together around goals. And for me, the aha of, I've always resisted this idea of goal setting. In part because in my career, you get these black and white forms and it's either right or wrong. And then I get review notes upon review notes. And so there's this reinforcement in my mind, it was for me, that there's a right or wrong. So if I write down my goals and I don't accomplish them, then I've somehow failed. And I wanted to create an experience to invite people in to look at their goals differently, and in a way that will hopefully bridge the gap between goals and reality. So I even call goals dreams. I feel like there's this disconnection that what we're actually moving towards are our own dreams of our life and what we want to do. And I bring 3 components to that: soul, self, and wealth. And anything that I'm doing, does this align with my soul, myself, and my wealth? So my soul being me, that lights me up, that inner calling that I shared with you. And then myself is Robina in this world as a mother and a wife and a person who loves to be out in nature. Is this choice going to help me at overall, right? Because I used to set my goals and I'm going to be partner CPA Robina, blinders on, and like wouldn't take into account that I also go run marathons and I have little tiny baby children and my husband gets deployed, and right, I just stayed on this one path, not looking at all of me. And now, and what I do is invite people to look at all aspects of your life, because those are the things that are going to trip us up if we don't bring them into the conversation and a part of the process. And then the next piece of it being our wealth, our energetic wealth and our financial wealth. And so building those goals to look at that and our dreams and ask those big questions and integrating it into everything, that's what's with it in the book. And making money a part of the conversation. Like, how do I feel about it? But also, are there's those things that I've been carrying with me that now are time to say goodbye to? And what does that look like? So that's the book. And then the article that you mentioned is the same of how, if somebody wants to incorporate one little piece of this into their business and they've been curious about it, what is consciousness? Then giving people a platform to where they can write in and ask those questions. And all I can do is share my own personal experience. I'm not an expert. I read books and articles and everything else and take knowledge in and apply it to my life. And then I share that with people there.
Cool. So certainly I believe we could have more Robinas in the world, because just from looking at your credentials and hearing what you share and offer the world at large, and your clients in particular, is obviously a gift. And one of the things that I'm curious about, I want to sort of pivot the conversation a little bit and the reason why I asked about your sort of service offering and how you show up in the world is because I think a lot of people who are curious about this idea of a regenerative practice and coming into the AAN might be asking the question, okay, I get that this stuff matters. I get that there's things that I could be doing, but where do I actually begin? How do I begin to start this process of re-examining my services or the way I talk to my clients? And I flagged that one because we've talked about language a couple of different times. So if you were sitting in front of you are sitting in front of practitioners right now, and they're asking this question like, okay, well, I love what Robina is doing, and I'd love to maybe try some things on myself at my own firm. What advice would you have for these practitioners who are at the beginning of the journey of becoming a regenerative practice?
Yeah, so I think it all begins with us, right? Like there's big, huge changes that we want to create, but at the end and the beginning of the day, it's in my hands. The choices that I make, the conversations that I'm having with people, and so even just kind of taking an inventory, if you will, of what, who are you interacting with on a day-to-day basis? What are your relationships with your client, your employees? Like, you don't even have to branch out to your clients. You look inside your own business first and say, like, how am I interacting with my own employees? What changes am I willing to make there that actually could make an impact, even with your children or your spouse or your friends or loved ones? Those conversations that you're having, because it's like a safe container to start trying things out before maybe you go out and just use new language with your clients. If you're not comfortable with it, it may not land as well, right? So that to me is kind of where my passion is, and asking my clients, well, what would it look like if at the end of the year, and you prepare, we do these evaluations with our team members, right? Is what if there was something built in there that said, you're asking your employee, like, hey, we've given you X number of hours of person development. Like, I like it to be person, you as a person development, whether that's your soul or whatever. And in addition to your technical CPE, we would like for you to be doing person development. And we noticed that we gave you a 20-hour allotment for the year, let's say, and you only hit 10 hours. How can we as a firm help you in hitting that 20-hour allotment? Or even looking at what is the true investment that you're making? Like, what if you were really honest with your employees on how much money you are investing in them and their growth and their success? That's another, like if you actually put a dollar amount to all of that. And just like, what changes could you make? Is it worth bartering maybe a couple, we're going to pay you $2,000 more because you asked for it, but we're not going to cover your insurance, your medical insurance. So what if we looked at that differently and like change the conversation so people don't feel like they're having to negotiate their salary and prove their worth before they ever showed up in the door? What might that look like, right? We talk about money very often. And if we're billing our clients in advance now, that's a big thing, right? Like billing in advance versus at the end of the month. How can we pay our employees differently? Especially in the accounting arena, where say, I know I've worked 100-hour weeks and I wait all year long, right, to get to the end, to get my evaluation and then my bonus based upon where I fell and all of that. And so then it's like, are we really paying people for the value that they are giving our firm, right? Like, I can look at the millions of dollars that I managed compared to what I was bringing home. And then but look at the hours I invest in my firm. Are they really paying me for that? Or are they keeping me on the hook at the end of the year? And then I might get compensated for all that extra that I gave. And how do we bring into the conversation, you know what, Robina, you drove this piece of our business, which that doesn't really that's not a client facing service, but it was super impactful to our team. And so we valued those hours the same way that we do the billable hours. And so it's just, again, to kind of go back, and I get really passionate about this and exploring what if, what else, not the what if, but what else can we do is like, what if we just ask those questions of ourselves? And that's what I even do in my business, is like, where am I going with this? What's the purpose behind it? Why am I choosing to do this? Like, if I'm going to go do public speaking over here, am I talking on a topic that I am passionate about? Or am I trying to feel this, like, I feel like this is what people want me to talk about, or this is what I know in my heart I'm supposed to talk about?
Brilliant. Thank you. So I want to kind of take the conversation to a little bit of another level, and weave in a consent conversation in here. Of course, stay within whatever you're comfortable with. But I want to ask you, Robina, about some of the challenges that you're experiencing either now or recently, recognizing that a lot of the accounting professionals watching this, imposter syndrome is endemic in the accounting industry. And, as people are watching us talk about these ideas around, coaching our clients on money conversations and where to start, and that, that's, kind of hindsight for you and looking at where you are now, that comparison is the thief of joy. And it's also the thief of validation. And we are all humans building this plane as we fly it out of super glue and duct tape and trying to figure it out as we go, throwing spaghetti at the wall. Show us a little bit of your mess. I would love to hear a little bit about, maybe a recent challenge, if it's a little too vulnerable and emotional to talk about a current challenge, whatever you'd like to share with us to show us the human of like, no, I'm still working on all of this.
Yeah, I'm a continual work in progress. I say that all the time. And and there's mess that goes along with that. And for people who are in the accounting profession, I agree. I was there where I compared myself to everybody, right? Because that's kind of the place that I was in, at least in my firm, in my experiences, is it's always, how do I get to that next level, right? How do I build my book of business? And so that it was such a competitive environment that I just started, like, I was mostly competing with myself and what was happening in my head. And that being said too, like, I didn't have time for podcasts and all. Like, once I left, I was like, oh, it's like, Costco after tax season. I was like, I didn't know all this stuff was out here. So I didn't have time, it just wasn't in my life. But even for myself, when I decided, there's been so many messes. One of them was even the catalyst to leaving, because after I was going back to work after my my medical leave, and I was talking to my young son, and he's like, why do you go to work? Like, what's this work thing about? And I said, well, our house and our cars and all of this. And he's like, well, Mom, like, for as much as you work, we must be millionaires. And I was like, I started bawling, and I'm trying not to cry in front of this like 7-year-old little guy, right? And I was like, yeah, as much as I work, I should have way more to show for it than myself. And that was another, like, what's going on here? I'm a CPA and I've got a master's degree and years, decades of experience. Why are my goals not matching up with my reality? So, in spite of all of that, like, and not to say that we were like, had nothing. I mean, definitely there was, but not as much as it could be. And obviously not as much as I was sacrificing that my young son was seeing. So that was a big waking up moment. And then even when I decided I'm going to go out on my own, as soon as I decided that, my husband's company left the state. I live in California. Lots of companies leave. And I told him, I said, I'm not giving up on this. I'm not staying. I can't work one more busy season. I'm going towards this. And I will be honest, like, there were times in there, like we were running thin, and I was like, I don't know how we're going to pay our mortgage this month. Like, what choices are we going to make? What are we going to do? But I remember that also being a moment where I just sat back and go, what language am I using? What am I believing? And there is that point where it was like, I was clinging so tight, like, well, I can't let go of this dollar, and I got to have this business. And I realized that my energy was all like this. I was so worried about losing something that I wasn't open to the idea of receiving something and how much abundance exists in the world if I open myself to it and I trust in my own worth and what I bring to what I do with my clients. And it's just like, through that and trusting and making choices that were super hard, doing things that I was like, I don't really like, this isn't where I wanted to go, but I trust that there's a reason, and seeing how it protected me along the way. And even like, I would say what would be a most recent thing, even with like, I got new office space so I could get out of the house, and taking that leap where I literally took, well, I said I was taking the summer off, 3 months off. It ended up being like 5 months out of my business, and then saying, okay, I'm going to turn the switch back on, trust that like my business is going to grow from there, and support the choices that I'm making. It's a day-to-day conversation that I'm having with myself, but still I'm asking, what am I believing in this moment? And if that's not true, what else might be? And I just keep going there.
How did that sabbatical go for you?
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. I think I really needed it. In one way, I was in Iceland and I'm looking at this nature, which I am a nature girl. I grew up in the woods, and like, I would rather be barefoot than in like, high heels any day, riding a horse or something. And I'm looking at this scenery, and there's a moment where it's like, man, I must have done something right. Like, I am so grateful to the Robina of 5 years ago, or wherever it was, or even like, in my 20s and 30s, making a hot mess of my life choices. I'm so grateful to her and every iteration of her, because I have so much gratitude and appreciation for where I am in this moment right now. And it is freaking amazing.
That is amazing. Thank you. And I'm curious, so what was the biggest lesson that you gained from taking that step back? For anybody who's ever thought about like, can I take a break? What does it look like to take a break and take care of me? And what preparation did you do to get yourself to the point where you could step back for 5 months? Because I bet that a lot of the accountants on this call are like, oh yeah, I wish, and like pushing that out into the someday instead of actually putting it on the calendar.
Right. Yeah. Well, I put it on the calendar. So I knew it was coming. And I'm married, I have a spouse. So there's like that financial, but also in my business, like, what do I have financially in place so that I can do that? And I also trusted that what was going to be the other side of this experience, it was going to make me better at what I do. I was tired. I was exhausted and burnt out from the last couple of years. I've supported a lot of people, which I absolutely love, but I could also feel inside of me like I need to take a step away, because this is what I need in this moment. And so I just would say, for people out there who are trying to figure out, put it on the calendar, play with it. This is my whole thing around like setting goals and dreams. You have plenty of trackers for all your stuff you need to do. Like, my Outlook is full of, I got to do these financials, and I have this appointment, and I got to post my newsletter, and right. But what about a space to just play in your dreams? To say, I'm going to go on, I call it a spiritual versus a sabbatical. I'm going to go on a spiritual for 3 months next year. What would that look like? What would I have to be put in place? And it's a great way to come face to face with your fears and what you believe may happen, and how can you empower your team, right? How can you, and like, what choice am I making today? Like, when I'm standing in the store with 3 pens, is that getting me to where I want to go? And if it's not, why am I choosing to make this choice in this moment? And I feel like, at least for me and what I've seen in other people, when we attach our business to something bigger beyond the revenue at the end of the year, it makes it a whole lot easier to walk through the challenging stuff, right? Like, if I know I'm taking 3 months next year, then that's going to drive my choices, and I'm excited to show up every day. Or if I've committed to, I want to buy X number of acres because I'm tired of seeing developers put more and more homes on top of them, then how am I getting there? And that makes me excited for the choices that I'm making today. But again, making sure that they align with who I am and my values and my purpose.
Yes. What are our non-financial KPIs, and how are we taking the time and focus to measure them? Thank you. Matthew, you want to, I know you've been burning with a way to jump in, and I'm like, oh, but this juicy, okay, take it. It's yours.
No. So I love all of the sort of like reflection on personal development that has to occur, in essence. And I think what also is coming up for me, I sort of listen to the podcasts and the sound bites of what's happening in the industry, right? And it's sort of interesting because as of late, it's been, we don't have enough talent, and everybody's retiring, and the people that are here are leaving because they can't stand it anymore, and it's like this sort of decline of talent for this industry, right? And then you couple that with that there's conversations sort of popping up that occur to not have, to some standards, quote, anything to do with accounting, right? That we're not talking about taxes and forms and compliance, and if we're not, then why are we wasting our time, right? And so, which is ironic because maybe those things go hand in hand. And I say that because I'm curious, like, you're kind of putting a little bit of a spotlight on an opportunity, in my opinion, for firms to think about maybe part of the retention issue is because of the culture that you're creating, and actually maybe those people might stay if they did what you said earlier around having that time allocated for personal development and enrichment, and then coupling that with that. We know that statistically the generations that are coming into the workforce and have come into the workforce as of late are more concerned with purpose and impact than they are with financial return, and certainly future financial return. Nobody wants to wait 40 more years to have that vacation, by quote, doing the right thing. And so my curiosity for you is as you look at these sort of firm leaders who are really actually wanting to take this, I think, talent issue at hand and really do something different with it or about it. What are some of the things that you recommend that these firm leaders do to begin to shift the talent challenges that we're faced with in the industry?
Oh, there's so many. First off, I think for any firm leader, and being there, they're doing a great job. They're working their ass off, right? So, and I believe that to be true. And we inherit this just as much as I inherit a belief from a parent. I inherited the way that I did my work, and a lot of times the way that I operated from the people that trained me, right? So sometimes we don't know that what we're doing is part of the problem. I don't look at it as a problem. It's an opportunity. So, first, I just want to say that, right? Because you're talking about, we hear that the accounting industry, there's the problem and the firm leaders are the problem, but how about they're actually the conduit for change and opportunity, right? Even the language that we're using there, because, we want people to come together versus feel defensive. And so the opportunity of creating that change, and I think it's enlisting many people. And also looking at, I find it interesting that we coach the upper levels of our firms, right? We bring in executive coaches, and firms do have coaches now and then. They're starting to hear it more and more. But what if that was a normal hire within a firm, or a collaboration with coaches and money coaches and life coaches? Because you need a little bit of everything, so that when people come in early, you're starting to help them with their mindset, maybe their own personal experience. There's a lot of people who came from not a whole lot, right? I know for us, when I was young, we didn't have much growing up. And so the fact that I made it through college and everything else was just pure ignorance. I just want to say I was super naive about the world. But here we are showing up, and I was working with multimillionaires, right? So if we start working with people when they first come in and investing in them, not working with them, but investing in their person growth to be stronger leaders, so that then when they're managers and they're managing a team, they have healthy management skills and healthy communication. What would that look like, and how would the firm grow there? Right? If you were at QuickBooks Connect and they talked about the long game, if you're willing to invest in the long game, that means investing in your people when they first come in, and showing that they're just as valuable as the people who are sitting in the offices, right? So I don't know if that answered your question.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, one thing that kind of came up is I remember as a kid at some point in my early career, hearing the concept of sink or swim as if that was like, all right, it's a sink or swim. So if you don't make it, good luck. And that's like not actually effective in my, and I think you're highlighting like, no, actually invest in these people, because you're hiring people, not, not machines, hoping that they're the, good enough to bang out enough widgets before they burn out,
Right. Well, and think about like, there's so much more conversation around people's, culture, right? And life and like the different aspects of demographics and everything. So we're so much more aware of that than we ever have been. And if you think about those people coming into working in your firm, and if you're able to like understand like the way that they look at something may be different than you, and how do we have more conversation to support them and to be successful in this business from the beginning and grow the firm versus feeling like, oh crap, I remember when I first started in public accounting and they're like prior year work papers. I don't know how I missed that topic in all of my auditing and accounting classes, but I was so happy because there was something that I could follow, right? But what if we had people in our firm that we could follow in that way? Like I remember there are certain managers throughout my career, very like few, where I was like, I like the way that he or she told me how to do something. How do I replicate that in my career? But there wasn't enough of it. So I also replicated a lot of things now that I look back and I'm like, oof.
Brilliant. Thank you. I want to shout out in the chat. Mariette has some great posts here. She says, I love so much these more unique KPIs. I have implemented those quantitative and qualitative KPIs into 2023 in my goal setting. And I'm excited to see the results of this change when I review my metrics throughout the year. So thank you so much, Mariette, for sharing that. And yeah, these are the kinds of conversations that we want to continue having within the Accounting Alchemy Network, is how can we do this together and eliminate this idea of competition, because there's plenty out there for all of us to do. We do not need to be fighting over it. How can we create a rising tide that raises all ships and support each other in this path? So with that, we are approaching the top of the hour pretty quick here. And I would love to ask you, Robina, what top takeaway would you love to leave with our Accounting Alchemy audience, recognizing that, of course, you are part of this community and continue this conversation with us. But in this moment right now, what's the one thing that's coming to your mind that you would love to put out there?
First and foremost, I always love to tell people you're doing a great job at what you're doing, right? Like don't be hard on yourself, give yourself grace and be kind. You're somebody out there loves you, and you may be beating up on their best friend or their wife or whatever. So with that, I think that's important. And I think the other thing is I've been really feeling this lately is there's been a lot of everybody's gone off and done their own thing. And I can feel an energy of people wanting to come back together and collaborate, right? And I think it's just a great opportunity. And whatever it is that you are doing, whether it be someone that you're working with within your firm, a partner, a client, is, we hear the term conscious uncoupling, right? Going back to the term conscious, like what if we were more conscious in our coupling? Who are we choosing to work with? Instead of looking at the metrics of, like, say you're going to acquire a firm, there's a lot of people retiring. Like, is it the right match? If you're, don't just look at the numbers, look at the people, because that's the most valuable asset within any business. And if you're a solopreneur, right, you're the only person that's in there doing everything, you are the most valuable asset. So how are you tending to that? And are you building it into what you're building for the future? And I think that's the way that we can have the biggest impact, whether it be on a very small scale or on a huge scale.
Thank you so much. You are so speaking to my heart right now. And just a really quick to kind of yes, and that idea. I was talking just last month with a financial advisor who was talking about some of their concerns around money and the things that they were going through. And as they were sharing, I was kind of getting this visual in my head of them building this like financial armor around them so that nothing could hurt them. And that was when I tried to remind them, true security is not financial. True security is relationships. If the market were to crash or, there was a natural disaster or things went sideways, all the finances in the world is not going to get food to a food desert under the wrong circumstances. Like if things are, if you're in a war zone or something like that, What we need are the people in our community, people who say, I've got you, and we're not doing this alone. That is what security is. And yet we've been distancing ourselves from our human relationships, seeming to think that the finances are going to back us up. And this person's response to me was, well, yeah, but relationships can hurt us. Relationships can disappoint us. Relationships can leave. We can get kicked out or something like that. And that's where we need to start looking at, okay, so where's that coming from? Because we need to deal with our trauma.
Right.
And those relationships.
Because if you feel that way about people, you feel that
Yeah.
way about money potentially. And it's more coming back to, it's not money protection, it's confidence. And the path to financial freedom is being confident with the money that you have in any scale. Because I talk to people who have millions and they still are trying to find that confidence in what they do have versus that fear.
Yes.
Right?
Beautiful. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. We are just past the hour because I was like, oh gosh, this juicy thought, your one last little takeaway. You just blew my mind.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who joined us on the back end, both on Zoom and on Facebook. And for those watching the replay, thank you so much. And any last thoughts from you, Matthew?
Just remember to comment below if you're watching the replay. Give us your thoughts. We're more than happy to continue the dialogue as it unfolds in both our Facebook and our LinkedIn group.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Robina, and we will talk to you
Thank you.
more.
Yes. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, Robina. Bye, Ingrid.
Bye.